Hey guys, and today we're going to do one of my favorite kind of videos, and that is a tribute to one of our veterans. Now this one is a little bit unusual. You see the gun here and you'll just kind of guess, okay, who carried this gun? This is going to be a tribute to a veteran from pre-World War I. Actually, he started his service in about 1911. He was a naval aviator. There's a picture of him here, and his name is Lieutenant Richard Saufley. Now, he's probably one of the most famous people that you've never heard of. That's right, he was one of the first naval aviators, and he has a lot of firsts. I'm going to go through a chronology of his accomplishments. Basically being a test pilot for float planes. He set several endurance records and also altitude records, and flew the first combat mission for a naval aviator. First, let's take a look at this gun, and then we'll talk a little bit more about Lieutenant Saufley. Now, this is a Colt double-action revolver. Right here you can see it's Colt, and it has a DA and 38. So it was a 38 caliber long, I believe they said, 38 caliber long. And this is the serial number here. It doesn't have U.S. Army or U.S. Navy. Oh, I just, live. I just see this name carved on here, and that's part of the history that I'm going to give you. I didn't know that was there before right this second. That's Carl, and I'll give you a little bit of information about him. So these are the original wooden grips. There's the Colt logo. This is a model 1895. Now, I really didn't know much about the model 1895, but it is one of the first double-action revolvers. We know from previous videos or from collecting that the single-action Army was very popular with the military, and there's the artillery model, and there's a Navy model. There's different models of the single-action Army, but this is one of the first double-action Army pistols. This included a lot of improvements, including the kind of cartridge. This actually used a later, it used a smokeless powder cartridge, but this one was not smokeless. It was too early. But one of the things that I found interesting is when you cock it, the cylinder goes counterclockwise. I'll let you see that. And I lower it. It goes counterclockwise, and you say, oh, see that? It didn't work. That's one of the things I wanted to show you. They said that the action on this, so they actually had a model 1892, 93, 94, 95, and they were basically working on the action of the cylinder. It has this model has this swing out cartridge, which the single action Army did not. So it had one of the inventions was the swing out, and that going counterclockwise. They said they constantly had problems with the action and the timing being a little bit off. So they constantly sent it back for repair. Just as a comparison, let me show you a model you're more familiar with, the 1917 U.S. Property. This is the 1917, and by the way, it comes in 45 caliber instead of 38, and there's a story behind that. And Saufley's era of soldiers were a part of that change to a higher caliber. I'll tell you about that, but let's look at the cylinder clockwise, and then listen to the action, nice and tight. And that action works perfectly. Now these on the bottom are marked U.S. property. Sometimes they'll say U.S., sometimes U.S. Marine Corps. This one is not marked, and that's because it was a civilian weapon. It was made for the commercial market. But pre-World War I, it was very common for officers to buy their own weapons. Now, I heard that a lot in studying European military, both World War I and World War II. You hear all the time about, well, their PPs and PPKs being private purchase guns because many of the officers, there weren't enough guns to go around. Many of the officers just purchased their own weapons. Pre-World War I, and what I read in researching this, it was very common for them to go out and buy their own weapon, and that's what Lieutenant Saufley did. At the time, he was Ensign Saufley, and he was at the military academy in Annapolis, Maryland. So he private purchased this from this individual. We'll do that in a second. He private purchased this from another officer, and then he used it through all the way up until his death. And we'll talk about that next. Let's see, a few other things about the pistol. I alluded to the fact that the 38 went to the 45 caliber. I've mentioned in other videos that in the Philippine War, they talked about the rebels being, they were juiced up on drugs and they would just keep coming. And they said we would shoot our pistols at them and it didn't stop them. And so after that, the military branches went to a 45 caliber. So up until the time they used the Beretta 9mm, most of the pistols that were issued to the U.S. Army came in the 45 caliber instead of the 38. In this story, there's going to be a few mysteries. There's things I didn't solve, and I didn't spend a whole lot of time on this just because it's one pistol and I've got lots of videos to do. But certainly your comments are extremely helpful. I really love the fact that you guys will write in things that you know that I didn't mention. One of the mysteries for me is this is the holster that came with it. No big deal. It fits well. It's a little beat up, so I am not going to put the gun in it. It does fit in there nicely, but I just don't want to ruin this leather or rip it at all. But here's the mystery that I found. This is a civilian purchase, but this looks like a rack number. And maybe like on a ship, they often would have maybe his weapon had to be registered and put on a rack, but it also has the serial number of the gun. You can see here, look right here, 75631, very faintly on there, and here it's 75631. So mystery number one is typically a commercial gun, they would not have serial numbered, but perhaps when he was stationed on a good number of ships, somewhere along the line they numbered this, or he bought this separately. Also, another mystery is that his serial number does not match here, and under here, 65 matches here. And what I'm reminded of these early guns, they often were not matching. A lot of the single action armies, the artilleries are all mismatched, and a lot of these early guns did not have matching numbers. They never were intended to. A lot of times they were manufacturer or assembly numbers as opposed to only one serial number on the frame. I'm convinced that this is all original, not put together later. It even has the original owner, which we'll talk about next. Carl Hinkle is the man who sold it to Richard Saufley. So this is a handwritten note from the man that we bought this gun from. And he said, this is a family heirloom. It's been in our family, and it was his great-grandfather, I guess, is Richard Saufley. And we said, well, how did he get it? And he said, well, he bought it from Carl Hinkle. And I said, well, how do we know that? Where did Carl Hinkle come into it? So all that is to say, this is the Colt Letter. Now, you save money. You can, those of you who haven't done it recently, you can call and order a Colt Letter. But it's cheaper if they just email you the information, and that's what he did. He paid a smaller amount. You can see that it was issued in 1898. That's probably the year it was made, 1898. It was shipped to Carl Hinkle. You can see Carl Hinkle's name right there. So that was 1898, sent to him, wood stock, blue finish, barrel length, and the caliber. And there is the serial number, which we've already discussed, the serial number at the bottom of the frame. That is who it originally went to. He gives the model of the gun, 6-inch barrel, plain we do that. There's the serial number, originally purchased by Carl Hinkle. Hinkle sold it to Richard Saufley in 1909 as they were friends, and Saufley had to buy his own guns. So there's that point. You know, he was in the military, he had to buy his own gun. When Saufley was killed, he was not carrying the gun. So it was given to his wife. Her name was Helen O'Rear Saufley. She later remarried, but we'll see the name Helen O'Rear. She later sold it to my great-grandfather, Otis O'Rear, one of the family members, for him to carry while working for the parish. Now, parish down south, it's common in Louisiana, but I think this was more in northern Florida. If you're outside the United States, you don't understand the concept of parish, but that would be like a district, an area, rural police. So he was working for the rural police in this area, I believe near Pensacola. I could be wrong. When he passed away, it was given to me. So the great-grandfather gave it to this gentleman. This gun has never left the family, as it is a family heirloom, and this is the gentleman that sold us the gun. I mentioned early on in the video that he's a very famous man that you never heard of. Some of you have heard of him if you were in the United States Navy, because outside of Pensacola there is a Navy base I never heard of, Saufley Naval Base, and it's named after him, and for good reason, as we'll see. But also there was a ship during World War II that was named after him, served all through World War II and Korea, and into Vietnam. It was decommissioned in '65. So some of you have heard of him if you served in the Navy. If you see the fine print here, there's a lot of detail that I'm just going to go, the chronology of his accomplishments. I'll be skipping over some things, but I thought it was pretty cool, and I learned a lot from history. I hope you do too. Richard Saufley was born in September of 1885. He attended the United States Naval Academy, of course, in Annapolis, in 1904. It must have been around the time of graduation that he had to buy a pistol. As an officer, he needed a pistol, or they encouraged him to get a pistol, because the letter that I just read to you said he purchased this pistol in 1909. If he entered the academy in 1904, it was right after he graduated and probably when he was first assigned to a ship. Okay, so in the chronology, it says in October of 1908 until 1912, he was assigned to the battleship USS Kansas. So that would mean he bought it while he was assigned there, and maybe that's where the rack number originally came from on the holster. Also, in 1911, he married Helen O'Rear. You remember that name? And talks a little bit about her. He was later assigned as an officer to a torpedo boat, the USS Biddle. Now, he started off his career not in a very good way, because while he was an officer on the Biddle, he was court-martialed. That's right. He's not infamous. He is famous. He did make good, but it must have been a political action of some kind, and I'll tell you why. He was assigned to the USS Biddle, and they were ordered out to sea, and he refused to go. The reason being, and there was other people with him, he refused to go because he said the ship was not seaworthy. Now, there was other commentary from other officers throughout the Navy that said most of the ships in the U.S. Navy are not seaworthy, and they were basically, you know, there were two factions. One was saying, just shut up and do your job, and other people were saying the Navy is underfunded. It probably was. And these ships need to be refurbished. So he said, he wrote to his commanding officer and said, I don't think the ship is safe. I don't want to take my men. He said, I'm not afraid for my life. I believe he was not afraid for his life when I look at his other actions. But he said, I fear for the safety of my crew. And so he was court-martialed, he was convicted, and sentenced to a demotion and a public disciplining, which, you know, I've seen on TV where they rip off your bars or something like that. So he was demoted and publicly shamed. But it said half of the officers supported him, and about half of the officers did not. So it seemed like he was caught up in a faction. Later on, he served on another ship, and the man who was in charge of that ship reinstated his previous rank because he said, I agreed with his actions, he did the right thing. So evidently, there was a lot of political wrangling going on in terms of funding for the Navy. And in fact, World War II started soon after that. We were not in the war, but that's when Congress started voting to refurbish and upgrade some of the ships. And Ensign Saufley was an integral part of upgrading the United States Navy, which is why they named a Navy base after him after being court-martialed. Okay, so some of the detail I just think is hysterical because, you know, he calls his commanding officer. Guess who his commanding officer was? He said in the middle of the night, he called his commanding officer, Commander Patton, and informed him that the ship was in such bad condition he would not take responsibility of risking the lives of the crew. Now, if your commander is Commander Patton, I'm wondering, some of you, I didn't look this up, but somebody out there needs to tell me. I know George Patton came from a military family. I'm wondering if this Commander Patton was related to the later Patton, in which case you don't want to screw around with him. It says that Commander Patton was the one that said, there's nothing wrong with the ship, and basically get your butt out there, and that's why he was court-martialed. So there's some intrigue here. So the court-martial was the end of near the end of 1911, and he finally was assigned to a ship. So he went through a couple of really bad years, especially with Commander Patton on his tail. But in 1913, he was reassigned to a destroyer, the USS Terry, and that's where the executive officer reinstated his rank. Later in 1913, this is all very ironic to me, later in 1913, he was actually given a promotion to lieutenant. And his commanding officer said that the court-martial was all a misunderstanding. In 1913, he was assigned back to the U.S. Naval Academy in order to receive training in their aviation school. He was one of the first naval aviators. In fact, his Naval Aviator number was number 8. And later, when he was in a squadron, it was number 14. So the bottom line, here's some pictures of some of these early naval aviators. So this is the first class of naval aviators back in 1913. And he was number 8 or number 14, depending on which base records you look at. In March of 1914, he graduated in the first class of naval aviators from the Academy. During the Mexican campaign, he was attached to the ship, the battleship USS Mississippi. The USS Mississippi carried 2 Curtiss hydroplanes. There's a picture of one here. These things look like they were put together with wire and toothpicks or rubber bands. And they did not take off like an aircraft carrier, but they would come alongside of the ship. A big crane would reach over, pick them up, and place them on the ship. So his first service as a naval aviator was during the Mexican campaign. In May of 1914, so he just getting into the war, he was the first naval aviator pilot to be involved in a combat mission. He and his co-pilot were in the territory of Veracruz. His assignment was to go behind enemy lines and kind of take a look at where, the numbers of the troops, how many firearms or cannons they had, and it was all over they were attacking a bridge. He and his co-pilot were flying at about 3,200 feet, which is fairly low, and the Mexican army was shooting at him. They were shot several times. They barely made it back to their ship. And upon inspection, they found bullet holes throughout the wings. So he was the first naval aviator to be on a combat mission and be fired upon. So in the summer of 1914, by now, World War I had started. The United States was officially neutral, but they went over. It was actually, he was assigned the USS North Carolina. They went over to observe and talk to some of the other captains of ships. And evidently, they were observing and talking to the French because they said the reason Lieutenant Saufley was sent is he was fluent in French, which I didn't realize. 1915 was a big year for Lieutenant Saufley, and that's because he was assigned to head up the aviation school back at Pensacola, Florida. The first squadron of naval aviators were coming out of Pensacola, Florida, and that's actually where later the base was named after him. So he was the head of the aviation training school. And the reason that he was chosen over the other officers is because they said he was not a drinker, he was not a hellraiser, he was very mature and could be counted upon. So contrast that to early in his career, right out of the academy, he's court-martialed for refusing to obey an order. Later, he gets promoted and made the head of an aviation school because of his conduct and his maturity. Also in 1915, he set an altitude record. It was only 12,000 feet, but that was actually above 12,000 feet, you need oxygen, or I believe you need oxygen. Again, you guys can correct me, but that was an aviation record, and he set it. He later broke his own record by going even higher. Also in 1915, he and his co-pilot experimented. They didn't have aircraft carriers then. Again, they were using cranes to put the planes onto the ship. But he experimented with, they got a big barge and they built a catapult with the help of the engineers. And he was the first one to be catapulted off of a barge. And that, of course, was a precursor to later the United States Navy making aircraft carriers. Also in 1915, he crashed for the first time. That's nothing to brag about, but evidently there was a problem with the stabilizer in the back of the plane, and he and his co-pilot went, they took a nosedive, but they landed right offshore or right near the shore, so it was right at the edge of the water. It kind of softened the blow a little bit, and they both survived. In early 1916, he broke his own altitude record, and this time he went 16,000 feet. And this comment says, this is higher than one is allowed to fly today without supplemental oxygen. And of course, he didn't have it at the time. Finally, June 9th of 1916, Saufley set an endurance record on his AH-9 pusher, which the pusher, the engine is in the back pushing the plane forward, but at the AH-9 pusher, he set a record of 8 hours, and this is an endurance record, 8 hours and 51 minutes. But unfortunately, the plane had some mechanical problems. It said the right elevator fluttered. It made a nosedive, plunged into the earth, and because the engines are in the back, it slammed forward and crushed his head and chest. So he was killed instantly. Now he was, again, that was June of 1916. He was survived by his wife, Helen O'Rear Saufley. And as far as I know, he had no children. In terms of a life that started out, it seemed like he was on the wrong foot, and incredible bravery and a lot of firsts, served his country. I know that he would have been involved in World War I had he lived, because he was at the forefront of naval aviation. And who knows what he would have accomplished if he had survived and gone into the war. Let's listen to a letter from his wife, Helen. This is the letter. I'm not sure when it was written. It's obviously pretty old. There's a glare on here, but I'm leaving it in here because I don't want to handle the paper. But this is Helen writing. She does sign it, Mrs. Helen O'Rear Saufley, and then she remarried Scruggs. It's hard for me to read, but I'm going to get through it. Around September of 1911, my late husband, Richard Saufley, purchased a Colt Revolver from Mr. J.C. Hinkle. We kept saying Carl Hinkle. This shows that this is not, this is real, because there is a J there. I kept saying C. Hinkle, and it's actually, you can see a J. J.C. Hinkle. So she's right, I was wrong. It had the serial number, and there it is, 75631, that Mr. Hinkle carried while on the USS Oregon. So he was also in the Navy, in the Great Fleet during the fight in Cuba. My husband was killed while in flight off Pensacola, Florida. This revolver has been in my possession along with his other revolver, so he obviously had two. He must have been a gun collector, because look at this. And Colt automatic pistols, plural. I am giving this Colt revolver to my cousin Otis. She calls him Rod, by the way. Rod in quotes. Otis Rod O'Rear. She goes on to say he had been given a position with the, looks like, Claiborne Parish. Some of you can let us know, is that outside of Pensacola or not? Given a position in the Claiborne Parish Sheriff's Office. They were required to provide their own pistol. We've heard that before. I believe my dear late husband would have wanted Rod to have this. And then she signs it. I was about to go over some of the medals and the other things that he has here when I said to Randy, hey, we should take the grips off. I had a 1911, a really early 1911 commercial gun. And we, on a whim, took the grips off, and on the inside there was inscribed who it went to and when. And it turns out he was a sheriff of a town in California. So I said, hey, why don't we take the grips off? And lo and behold, when we did, so this again, unrehearsed, had not taken off the grips before this. A lot of rust in here that's been cleaned off, and here as well. Remember, we're talking very old, 1890s, 1900, and you're in Pensacola, Florida, near the salt you know, the salt coast, salt air. So it's understandable that this would have gotten some corrosion damage. And here's what we found on the graves. First of all, we already mentioned J.C. Hinkle, who was the original owner, and that's what the Colt Letter indicates. But what we didn't mention is, because it's really hard to see, it does say USS Oregon. And if you remember the original letter, we talked about the fact that Hinkle served on the USS Oregon. So he was in the Navy. He was friends with Saufley and sold him his gun. When we took this off, it does say R.C. Saufley. And then the serial number of the gun is written in pencil right here. So he obviously inscribed his name on here. The original owner's name is here, along with the Oregon. Saufley served on several ships, as we already indicated. And then this is just his initials, RCS. And then also right here, not carved in, but stamped, RCS, which we can see is from Richard C. Saufley. I think I mentioned earlier, we will be offering this for sale, and I hate to give it up, but I'll move it along to somebody who really enjoys collecting some naval history. Maybe somebody from the Navy would like to own this. This is preserved in acrylic, and so I thought, well, this must be something important. There was no explanation. However, what I figured out, it says page 3 over. So somebody typed a letter. And then probably page 4, if this was 3, this would have to be 4, because they ended the letter, he signed it. So this is his actual signature, Ensign, early on, because he was later a lieutenant, but this is Ensign R.C. Saufley, and that's the Naval Air Station in Pensacola, Florida. This is dated the 12th of December, 1915. Remember, he died in 1916. Also, this is his shoulder board, and from the picture, this could be the exact same one, although the star here is missing. Perhaps it fell off. But this is an original shoulder board, I assume for an ensign or a lieutenant. Those of you who are in the Navy, and by the way, a shout out to my nephew Carson, who is in the U.S. Navy serving right now. Perhaps he can fill in some of these blanks. Those of you who are in the Navy, you can tell me if this rank is a lieutenant or an ensign. He was both. And then this would be the collar tab, and I assume the collar tab, and you can let me know if that tells us any more. But here we have 2 medals that he received. One was from Mexico, and I mentioned that was the first combat flight of a Naval Aviator. And so the Mexican campaign, they didn't call it a war, they called them campaigns. And this was from the Navy, service in the Navy. And again, that's where he flew the first combat mission. And then also the Nicaraguan campaign in 1912, a little bit earlier. This is from the United States Marine Corps. They were intermingled at that point, and they still are. The Marine Corps, Marine aviators and Navy aviators, they still do their jobs working together on ships all around the world. Hey, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed that story. Upon personal reflection, I think about a guy who graduates from the military academy, and one of the first things that he does that distinguishes himself, not in a good way, is he gets court-martialed. And that was because he refused to take his ship out in what he considered dangerous conditions. Not the weather, but the condition of the ship was not good. And he said, "I'm not concerned about my own life, but I'm concerned for the life of my crew." Now, I would normally say, yeah, that's a load of crap. He was just too scared. But when you take a guy who set the altitude record, he set the endurance record, he was the first to launch off of a ship, a float plane off of a ship, basically using a catapult. He was the first to fly in a combat mission. This was a brave man who started out on the wrong foot and was able to turn things around and turn his whole career around and accomplish a lot. For that reason, I say thank you for your service. And also for all of you serving all over the world, those in the armed forces serving around the world, be safe and thank you.